The lights flickered softly in the vast corridors of Deep Space Monitor Station, Omega-7. It was just another quiet Tuesday in the outer rim of human space, where the stars seemed endless and nothing ever happened. Communications Officer Park. Minho sat at his console, monitoring the usual background chatter of merchant ships and patrol vessels going about their business. He'd been doing this job for 3 years now, and honestly, it was pretty boring. Most days he just listened to cargo reports and weather updates from mining colonies. The most exciting thing that usually happened was when someone's navigation computer glitched and they needed directions. But today was different. The signal came in weak at first, barely stronger than the cosmic background noise. Minho almost missed it completely. Something made him pause though, maybe the way it pulsed in an unnatural pattern. He adjusted his equipment, boosting the signal strength and running it through the translation computers. What he heard made his blood run cold. The voice was definitely not human. It had that strange, melodic quality that marked it as alien speech, but the computer was translating it clearly enough. Someone was screaming for help across the void of space, their words broken up by static and what sounded like explosions in the background. Please, ... anyone. Research station under attack. Peaceful mission. They're killing everyone. Minho's hands shook as he tried to clean up the signal. He'd never heard anything like this before. Sure, everyone knew there were other intelligent species out there, but actual contact was rare. And this was someone dying. Admiral, you need to hear this, Minho called across the command center, his voice cracking slightly. The command center of Omega-7 wasn't huge, but it felt enormous. In the sudden silence, other technicians stopped their work, sensing something was wrong. The soft hum of computers seemed louder somehow. Admiral Kim Jae-sung was in his office reviewing supply reports when Minho's call came through. He was a veteran of the border. War's a man who'd seen too much violence in his 53 years. His face was weathered from years of command, and his eyes held the kind of weariness that came from making life-and-death decisions. He walked quickly to Minho's station, his military boots clicking on the metal floor. What do you have, son? Minho played the cleaned-up signal. The alien voice was clearer now, desperate and afraid. The translation came through in fragments. Kepler 442 system. Research colony ... unprovoked attack ... civilians only. Please, help us. ... Jae-sung listened with growing concern. He'd dealt with pirates and raiders before, but this was different. This was someone calling across the darkness of space, hoping against hope that someone would hear them and care enough to help. How far is Kepler 442? He asked quietly. 3 weeks at maximum hyperspace velocity, sir, replied Navigation Officer Kim Soo-jin from her station. The Admiral was already moving, his mind switching into crisis mode. He turned to his aide, Commander Lee So-young, who had appeared at his shoulder like she always did when trouble started. How long to assemble a response fleet? Jae-sung asked. So-young consulted her tablet, running through protocols and procedures. Sir, the Galactic Confederation protocols suggest we should first attempt to verify the signal's authenticity, then contact the relevant authorities, establish diplomatic channels, and Commander Jae-sung interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. I didn't ask about protocols. I asked how long. So-young straightened, recognizing the tone. She'd served under the Admiral for 5 years and knew that look. It was the same expression he'd worn during the Proxima crisis, when pirates had attacked a civilian transport. That incident had ended with the complete destruction of the pirate fleet and a reputation that still made criminals think twice about targeting human ships. 6 hours for a battle group, sir. 12 if you want a full task force. The Admiral stared at the star charts on the main display, showing the location of Kepler 442. Someone out there was dying, calling for help across impossible distances. Most species would debate and discuss, form committees and consider the political implications. But humans were different. They'd always been different. "Make it 4 hours," Jae-sung said firmly, "and I want volunteers only. No one gets ordered into this." So-young nodded and began working her communicator, sending out calls to every human military vessel within range. "What should I tell them, sir?" The Admiral looked back at the communications station where Minho was still monitoring the fading alien signal. Somewhere in the Kepler 442 system, people were dying. They'd sent out a desperate call for help, not even knowing if anyone would hear them. "Tell them someone's calling for help," Jae-sung said simply. "That should be enough." The news traveled through space faster than any ship ever could. Within hours of Admiral Kim's fleet mobilization order, every major civilization in the galaxy knew about it. The galactic communication networks buzzed with worried chatter, and on dozens of worlds, alien leaders gathered in emergency sessions on the beautiful garden world of Centauri Prime, where crystal spires reached toward purple skies and gentle waterfalls sang through floating cities. Ambassador Veltar received the report during his morning meal. The Altarian's blue skin turned pale as he read the intelligence briefing on his datapad. "The humans are moving again," he announced to his council, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy. Full military response. The Grand Council chamber, usually filled with the melodious voices of civilized debate, fell completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished marble floor. 37 of the galaxy's most experienced diplomats sat frozen in their seats, and every single one was thinking the same thing. The humans were going to war. Counselor Zephany, young and still optimistic about galactic peace, raised a trembling hand. She'd only been appointed last year and had never lived through a human military action. "Perhaps we should warn whoever they're targeting. Surely civilized beings can resolve this through negotiation." Ambassador Veltar's tentacles drooped until they nearly touched the floor. He was old enough to remember the Proxima incident, when human pirates had made the mistake of attacking a medical transport carrying wounded civilians. The human response had been swift and absolute. An entire pirate fleet, over 200 ships, had been turned into glowing debris in less than 6 hours. "Warn them of what?" Veltar asked sadly. "That they've awakened the only species crazy enough to weaponize their own extinction instinct. That they've angered a race that considers death before dishonor to be a lifestyle choice. Child, it's already too late for warnings." The other counselors nodded grimly. They all knew the stories. There was the vegan slaver syndicate, which had raided 3 human colonies for fresh slaves. The slavers had simply vanished one day. No wreckage was ever found, no survivors recovered. The humans never officially claimed responsibility, but slaving raids on human space had mysteriously stopped forever. Then there was the Rigel trade war, where corporate pirates had tried to muscle in on human shipping routes. The pirates had expected the usual diplomatic protests and economic sanctions that other species used. Instead, human merchant ships had started carrying military-grade weapons, and pirate attacks had become suicide missions. The galaxy had learned to fear and respect what they called Deathworlders, beings from planets so dangerous that simply surviving childhood turned them into natural warriors. Most Deathworld species never made it to the stars. They usually destroyed themselves before developing space travel. Humans were different. They'd not only survived their violent homeworld, but had turned that violence into a precision tool. They didn't fight like other species, with grand strategies and political objectives. Humans fought like their planet had taught them, with the desperate fury of something that refused to die quietly. On distant homeworlds, alien mothers tucked their children into bed with whispered stories about the strange species from the third planet of a yellow star. They told tales of beings who would cross impossible distances to help complete strangers, who considered their own deaths acceptable prices for protecting others. "Why do the Deathworlders care so much about strangers?" children would ask. Because their mothers would whisper, that's what makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They don't just fight for themselves, they fight for anyone who calls for help. In the grand archives of the Galactic Library, scholars recorded humanity's most terrifying characteristic. It wasn't their advanced weapons or their tactical brilliance. It was their absolute refusal to ignore suffering, even when it belonged to people they'd never met. Most species looked at the vast emptiness of space and saw isolation. Humans looked at the same emptiness and saw neighbors who might need help someday. That difference had changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Ambassador Veltar dismissed the council with heavy hearts. Somewhere in the Kepler 442 system, someone was about to learn why the galaxy's predators had nightmares about humans. The lesson would be brief, brutal, and absolutely final. Captain Cho Dongmin had been on routine patrol near the Jupiter mining stations when the call came in. His small cruiser, the Incheon Dawn, wasn't much to look at, just a standard patrol vessel with basic weapons and a crew of 32. But when Admiral Kim's message reached him, asking for volunteers to help unknown aliens in distress, Dongmin didn't hesitate for even a second. Set course for the rally point, he'd ordered his navigator. Maximum speed. Now, 6 hours later, he stood on his bridge, watching something he'd never seen before in his 15 years of military service. Ships were appearing out of hyperspace. Every few minutes, their hulls gleaming in the light of distant stars. Each new arrival made his small cruiser feel even smaller by comparison. How many ships now? Dongmin asked his navigator, Chief Petty Officer Kim Hae-won. Hae-won checked her scanners, her eyes widening at the numbers. 200 and counting, sir. Command says volunteers are still arriving from every sector. Lieutenant Han Yu-jin, fresh out of the Space Academy, with barely 6 months of real service under her belt, stared at the tactical display in amazement. The screen showed dozens of ship markers, with more appearing constantly. Destroyers, frigates, carriers, supply ships, and even massive dreadnoughts that she'd only seen in training videos. Double quotes, sir, this is just for one distress signal, Yu-jin asked, her voice filled with wonder. From aliens we've never even met before. Dongmin turned to look at the young officer. She was barely 22, born long after the border wars that had shaped his generation. She'd grown up in peace, never really understanding why humans had such a reputation throughout the galaxy. Kid, that's exactly why we're going, he said with a grim smile. Someone called for help across the void of space, not knowing if anyone would even hear them, and humans don't ignore that, ever, as if to prove his point. Another ship materialized nearby, a massive battle cruiser that made even their destroyer escorts look small. The Soul's Hammer, one of humanity's most powerful warships, had answered the call, just like everyone else. But it wasn't just the military ships that impressed Dongmin. Regular merchant vessels were arriving too, their civilian crews volunteering to help however they could. Cargo haulers had installed temporary weapon mounts. Passenger liners had been converted into medical ships. Mining ships brought their industrial cutting tools, ready to clear debris or breach enemy hulls, if needed. The communication channels buzzed with chatter as old friends recognized each other's ships. Veterans of a dozen conflicts greeted each other like family members gathering for a reunion. Reserve units that had been mothballed for years were suddenly back in service, their crews shaking off rust and remembering their training. Look at that, whispered Navigator Hae-won, pointing at her screen. A battered old freighter had just arrived, its hull scarred from countless battles. The ship's registry identified it as the Dragon's Tooth, commanded by the legendary Captain Song Min. Song had officially retired after the border wars, but his ship bristled with enough weapons to outfit a military destroyer. Is that really him? Yu-jin asked excitedly. The Song Min-jan? The one who single-handedly fought off that entire pirate squadron at Titan Station? The very same, Dongmin confirmed. And if he's here, Things are about to get very interesting for whoever's attacking those aliens. On the bridge of the carrier Busan, Commander Park Soo-bin watched the growing fleet with mixed emotions. She'd served in the last war, had seen what human military might could accomplish when properly focused. The assembled force was already larger than most nations' entire space navies. "Looks like we're going to war," she observed to her communications officer. Admiral Kim Jae-sung's voice crackled over the fleet communication channel, reaching every ship simultaneously. His words were calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. "No, Commander," the Admiral corrected her. "We're going to help. The war is just what happens when someone tries to stop us." Those words sent a chill down Subin's spine. She remembered the last time she'd heard the Admiral speak like that. It had been during the Proxima crisis, and it had ended with an entire enemy fleet reduced to space debris. Across the assembled armada, crews prepared for what was coming. This wasn't about conquest or politics or resources. This was about something much simpler and much more dangerous. Humans had heard someone calling for help, and they were answering that call with everything they had. The fleet continued to grow throughout the night, a gathering storm of humanity's finest and most determined defenders, ready to cross the galaxy for strangers they'd never met. The journey through hyperspace felt both endless and too short at the same time. 3 weeks of traveling through the strange, twisted realm between normal space, where stars looked like streaks of light and time seemed to move differently. For the crews of the massive human fleet, those weeks became a period of intense preparation, unlike anything most of them had ever experienced. Aboard the destroyer, Incheon, the days blended together in a rhythm of training, maintenance, and more training. Weapons Officer Kim Minna had turned her gun deck into a precision instrument of controlled chaos. The sound of drill alarms echoed through the corridors at all hours as her crews practiced loading, targeting, and firing sequences until they could do them in their sleep. "Remember, we don't know what we're facing out there," Minna told her team during one of their daily briefings. "Could be a few raiders looking for easy prey. Could be a full military force with ships bigger than ours." The weapons bay hummed with activity as technicians checked and rechecked every system. Petty Officer Lee Jun-ho, a quiet young man from the farming colonies of Europa, raised his hand during the briefing. He'd been thinking about something that bothered him. "Ma'am, what if they surrender when they see us coming?" he asked. "I mean, what if they realize they're outgunned and just give up?" Mina paused, considering the question. It was a good one, and it showed that Junyo was thinking beyond just the mechanics of combat. "Then we accept their surrender and help with the relief efforts," she replied simply. "We're not here to destroy people. We're here to stop them from hurting others." She looked around at her crew, seeing a mix of veterans and newcomers, all united by the same purpose. But if they want to fight, ... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood. The crew had been monitoring the intercepted alien communications for days now, and what they'd learned had hardened their resolve. The attackers called themselves the Krell Hegemony, and their reputation was already spreading through the fleet's intelligence networks. The Krell were slavers, pure and simple. They specialized in attacking peaceful civilizations, crushing any resistance, and dragging the survivors away in chains to work in their mines and factories. Intelligence reports painted a picture of a species that had turned cruelty into an art form, one that measured success by how much suffering they could inflict. In Admiral Kim Jae-sung's ready room, the mood was grimmer but just as determined. The Admiral sat at his conference table, surrounded by his senior staff. Tactical displays showing everything they knew about the Krell and the Kepler 442 system. The information wasn't complete, but it was enough to paint a disturbing picture. "Commander," Lee So-young pointed to the tactical data with her stylus, highlighting key points on the holographic display. "Intelligence suggests the Krell use intimidation tactics as their primary strategy. They show overwhelming force right from the start, trying to break enemy morale before the fighting even begins. Captain Yu Sang-woo, who commanded the fleet's marine contingent, leaned back in his chair with a dry chuckle. He was a veteran of the border wars, a man who'd seen the worst that warfare could offer, and had somehow kept his sense of humor intact. "They never fought humans then," he observed, shaking his head. "We get more stubborn when someone tries to scare us. It's like they've never studied our history at all." The Admiral nodded grimly. He was thinking about Earth's long history of warfare, how humans had always performed best when their backs were against the wall. From ancient battles to the colonial wars, to the recent border conflicts, humans had a tendency to dig in harder when faced with overwhelming odds. "Prep the fleet for full combat operations," Admiral Kim ordered. "If these Krell want to learn about human stubbornness, we'll be happy to teach them." Throughout the fleet, similar scenes played out on hundreds of ships. Combat drills ran around the clock. Medical teams prepared their equipment for mass casualty events. Engineers checked every system twice, then checked them again. Marines cleaned their weapons with religious devotion, while pilots ran simulation after simulation. But it wasn't just military preparation. The crews were preparing mentally and emotionally for what they might find. They'd all heard the distress signals by now, the desperate voices of the alien researchers calling for help. They knew they were racing to save people they'd never met, members of a species they knew nothing about, and somehow that made them even more determined to succeed. The moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, every crew member knew they were looking at a massacre. The stars should have been beautiful here, but instead they illuminated a graveyard that stretched across millions of kilometers of empty space. Captain Cho Dongmin stood on the bridge of his destroyer, staring at the tactical display with growing horror. Where peaceful research stations should have been orbiting the system's planets, there was nothing but twisted metal and debris clouds. The wreckage told a story of systematic destruction that made his stomach turn. "My God," whispered Navigator Kim Hae-won, her voice barely audible. "They destroyed everything." Lieutenant Han Yujin, the young officer who had questioned why they were risking so much for strangers, felt tears starting to form in her eyes. Scattered among the debris were dozens of small objects that the computer identified as escape pods. Most were dark and cold, their occupants long dead, but a few still showed faint power signatures. "Survivors," she announced, her voice cracking slightly. "There are still people alive out there." Admiral Kim Jae-sung's voice came over the fleet communication channel, steady and reassuring despite the devastation they were witnessing. "This is Admiral Kim Jae-sung of the Human Solar Federation. We received your distress call 3 weeks ago. We're here to help." The response came from a hollowed-out asteroid that the survivors had apparently turned into a makeshift shelter. The voice that answered was unlike anything the humans had ever heard. Musical, almost like singing, but filled with exhaustion and desperate hope. "You, ... you actually came." The alien voice trembled with disbelief. "But we are strangers too. Your species has traveled so far and risks so much for beings you have never met." It was Commander Park Soo-ben who took charge of the rescue operations. Her carrier Busan was equipped with the most advanced medical facilities in the fleet, and she immediately began coordinating the recovery of survivors. As her shuttle crews brought the first refugees aboard, she had to step away for a moment to compose herself. The beings they were rescuing were beautiful in a way that took your breath away. Tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. They moved like dancers, even in their weakened state. Their large, expressive eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably peaceful and curious. "They're scientists," reported Chief Medical Officer Dr. Park Min-young, after examining the first group of survivors. "Researchers, teachers, artists. These people were studying star formation when the attack came. They've probably never heard anything in their entire lives." Dr. Zender, who appeared to be the leader of the surviving researchers, was brought to Subin's ready room once he was strong enough to talk. The alien scientist was clearly struggling with exhaustion and trauma, but he insisted on trying to explain what had happened to his people. "We called ourselves the Vorthen," he said in that musical voice, though now it was broken by grief. "We came to this system to study the birth of new stars. It was supposed to be a 5-year research mission." His voice broke as he continued. "They came without any warning. Massive ships that blocked out the sun. They didn't even try to communicate at first, just started destroying our stations. When we finally managed to talk to them, they gave us an ultimatum." Subin leaned forward, her hands clenched into fists. "What did they want?" "Submit to slavery, or die," Zender replied, his luminous eyes filling with what could only be tears. "They said we were an inferior species, fit only to serve the Krell hegemony. When we refused to surrender our freedom, they began the slaughter." The Vorthen scientist's description of the attack was heartbreaking. The Krell had methodically destroyed each research station, killing anyone who resisted and capturing others for transport to their slave markets. Families had been torn apart, children separated from parents. Scholars who had devoted their lives to understanding the universe reduced to cargo for alien slave traders. Captain Cho Dongmin, who had been assigned to escort the survivors to the medical bays, found himself making a promise that would be remembered by both species for generations to come. "They won't hurt you again," he said firmly, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who had never broken his word. "Humans don't abandon friends." Dr. Zender looked up at him with confusion written across his elegant features. "But we are not your friends. We have never even met before today." Dongmin's smile was gentle, the kind of expression a father might wear when comforting a frightened child, but his eyes held the cold steel of someone who had seen war and was prepared to see it again. "You are now," he said simply. War Prime Gorthak lounged in his command throne aboard the massive Krell battleship Dominator, watching the human fleet's arrival with nothing but amusement. His scaled hide bore the ritual scars of 17 conquered civilizations, each one a trophy, marking another species he'd crushed beneath the Krell boot. The humans looked impressive enough, he had to admit. Their ships were sleek and well-armed, clearly built by a species that understood warfare. But Gorthak had seen impressive fleets before. The Altarian Defense Force had looked mighty too, right up until he'd turned their homeworld into a slave market. "Unknown vessels," he transmitted to the human fleet, his voice dripping with contempt. "You intrude in Krell space. Withdraw immediately, or face the same fate as these pathetic research rats." Around him, his bridge crew chittered with laughter. They'd heard this kind of bravado before from species who thought they could challenge the Krell hegemony. It usually ended the same way, with new slaves in the cargo holds and fresh scars on Gorthak's hide. Admiral Kim Jae-sung's response came back calm and diplomatic, the kind of measured tone that politicians used when they were trying to avoid a fight they knew they couldn't win. "This is Admiral Kim of the human fleet. We demand immediate cessation of hostilities against the Vorthon people and complete withdrawal from this system. We're prepared to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution." Gorthak's laughter echoed through his bridge. Terms. These mammals wanted to negotiate. He'd crushed entire star empires, and now some backwater species thought they could dictate terms to him. But then something unexpected happened. A single human shuttle detached from the main fleet, broadcasting on all frequencies that it was approaching under a flag of truce. The small craft was completely unarmed, its hull painted with the universal symbols of diplomatic immunity. "They're actually sending negotiators," observed Sub-Commander Krext from his position at the tactical station. "Should we hear what they have to say?" Gorthak's eyes glittered with cruel amusement. This was perfect. He could destroy their diplomats and break their morale at the same time. It was a tactic he'd used dozens of times before, and it never failed to crush enemy resistance. The shuttle Harmony approached slowly, piloted by Captain Jung Soo-min, a veteran diplomat who'd volunteered for what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission. In the passenger compartment sat Ambassador Nam Hai-jin and her small staff of translators and cultural specialists. They all understood the risks of dealing with a species known for enslaving others, but someone had to try. "This is Ambassador Nam of the Human Diplomatic Corps," came the transmission from the small shuttle. "We're here to discuss the immediate release of Vorthan prisoners and the withdrawal of Krell forces from this system. We believe this conflict can be resolved without further bloodshed." Gorthek listened to the translation with growing delight. These humans actually believed they could talk their way out of this. They were about to learn what happened to species that showed weakness to the Krell. "Fire," he ordered simply. The Harmony disappeared in a brilliant flash of plasma fire, vaporized so completely that not even debris remained. The brave humans aboard never had time to realize what was happening. Ambassador Nam, who had spent her life building bridges between species, died instantly, along with her entire staff. Gorthak leaned back in his throne, savoring the moment. This was always his favorite part, the moment when his enemies realized that mercy was weakness and diplomacy was pointless. Now the humans would either flee in terror or attack in desperation, and either way, they would lose. The silence that followed stretched across space like a held breath. The human fleet hung motionless in the void, processing what had just happened on dozens of bridges. Seasoned officers stared at their screens in shock and growing fury. Then Admiral Kim Jae-sung's voice cut through every communication channel, reaching not just his own fleet, but every ship in the system. His tone was different. Now, no longer diplomatic, no longer patient. It was the voice of someone who had just watched friends die and was about to do something terrible about it. "All ships, this is Admiral Kim. Diplomatic mission destroyed. Ambassador Nam and her staff are confirmed killed under a flag of truce." There was a pause, and when he continued, his voice had become as cold as the void between stars. "You have 30 minutes to begin immediate withdrawal from this system. After that, you'll learn why humans are the only species to survive on a world that actively tries to kill everything on it." Across the human fleet, weapon systems came online with deadly precision. Captain Song Minjin, the legendary veteran, who'd come out of retirement for this mission, activated his ship's considerable armament with a grim smile. "About damn time," he muttered. Gorthak had just made the last mistake of his very long career. He'd murdered diplomats under a flag of truce, and now he was about to discover why. That was considered the most foolish thing anyone could do to humans. The countdown had begun. When the 30-minute countdown reached 0, what followed wasn't really a battle in any traditional sense. It was more like a masterclass in the difference between looking dangerous and actually being dangerous. The Krell had built their entire fleet around the concept of intimidation. Their ships were massive, dark, and covered with spikes, and aggressive. Angles designed to strike fear into the hearts of peaceful civilians. They looked like something out of a nightmare, which was exactly the point. For decades, the mere sight of Krell vessels had been enough to make entire civilizations surrender without firing a shot. But humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare against opponents who actually fought back. Their ships looked almost elegant by comparison, sleek, efficient designs that prioritized function over fear, where Krell vessels relied on psychological warfare. Human ships were built for one simple purpose: to destroy other ships as quickly and efficiently as possible. Captain Cho Dong-min watched from the bridge of his destroyer, Incheon as the engagement. Timer reached 0. "All weapons, fire," he ordered calmly. The human missiles reached out across impossible distances, their targeting systems locking onto the Krell flagship with deadly precision. Warprime Gorthak had exactly 3 seconds to realize that his shields which had been perfectly adequate for crushing defenseless research stations, were about as effective as tissue paper against actual military weapons. The dominant shields collapsed completely, and secondary explosions began rippling along its hull. "Target their weapon systems," Dongmin instructed his weapons officer. "We want prisoners who can answer for their crimes." But Gorthak, faced with real resistance, for the first time in his long career of bullying civilians, made his second and final fatal mistake. In his panic and rage, he ordered his remaining ships to target the clearly marked human medical vessels that were still rescuing Vorthan survivors. The response from the human fleet was immediate and absolutely merciless. Captain Park Soo-ben, who had been coordinating rescue operations from her carrier Busan, watched in cold fury as Krell weapons targeted her hospital ships. "All Marines, prepare for boarding operations," she announced. "No mercy for anyone who targets medical personnel." Major Kang Hyojin led the first wave of human Marines as they crashed through Krell airlocks like an unstoppable force of nature. The Krell warriors, who had spent their careers terrorizing defenseless researchers, discovered what it was like to face soldiers who had been trained since childhood, to fight opponents who fought back. The boarding actions were swift and brutal. Human Marines moved through Krell ships with a precision that came from centuries of military evolution, clearing corridor after corridor with methodical efficiency. The Krell, for all their reputation as fierce warriors, had never actually fought anyone who wasn't already beaten down and demoralized. Meanwhile, Commander Lee So-young coordinated the fleet's movements from the flagship's tactical center with mathematical precision. Every Krell escape route was cut off, every attempt at retreat blocked by perfectly positioned human vessels. The Krell fleet found itself trapped in a web of human ships that tightened around them like a closing fist. Lieutenant Kim Mina, the weapons officer aboard the Incheon, worked her gun crews with mechanical efficiency. Each shot was placed with surgical accuracy, designed to disable rather than destroy when possible. But her voice carried deadly cold as she whispered, "This is for Ambassador Nam," watching another Krell cruiser break apart under her precisely targeted fire. The Krell had expected their enemies to fight like the civilized species they usually encountered, with hesitation, with rules, with mercy for the defeated. Instead, they found themselves facing an opponent that fought with the calculated fury of a species that had turned warfare into a science. The battle lasted exactly 6 hours, from first shot to final surrender. When it ended, the Krell fleet had simply ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Some ships had been destroyed, others captured, and the few that managed to flee did so only because the humans let them go, carrying word of what happened to those who murdered diplomats. But what amazed Dr. Zender and the other Vorthan survivors was what happened next. The moment the fighting stopped, human ships immediately switched to rescue operations. The same Marines who had been storming Krell vessels with deadly efficiency were now pulling Krell survivors from the wreckage, treating their wounds with the same dedication they'd shown to attacking. "Why do you save your enemies?" Dr. Zender asked Captain Yu Sang-woo, whose combat armor was still smoking from the boarding actions. The human Marine commander looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Because the fighting's over. Now we help the wounded. That's just what you do." The news traveled faster than any ship could fly. Within days of the battle's end, every major civilization in the galaxy knew what had happened in the Kepler 442 system. The Krell hegemony, a force that had terrorized dozens of star systems for over a century, had been completely destroyed in a single 6-hour engagement. But what truly shocked the galactic community wasn't the human military victory. Other species had defeated the Krell before, though never so decisively. What amazed everyone was what the humans did next. Instead of claiming Krell territory as spoils of war or demanding tribute from the systems they'd liberated, the humans simply started rebuilding. Within a week, construction ships began arriving. In the Kepler 442 system, their holds packed with supplies, medical equipment, and advanced construction materials. The destroyed Vorthen research stations were rebuilt, but not just restored to their original condition. Human engineers worked alongside Vorten scientists to create facilities that were better than anything the peaceful researchers had ever dreamed of. Advanced laboratories, comfortable living quarters, and defensive systems that could protect against future attacks. Ambassador Veltar, of the Altarian Republic, arrived 3 weeks later for what he expected would be tense diplomatic negotiations. The Altarians had fought the Krell before, and knew how these things usually went. The victors would demand payment, territory, or political concessions. Instead, he found himself sitting across from Admiral Kim Jae-sung in a comfortable conference room aboard the human flagship, sipping tea and discussing humanitarian aid distribution. "We don't understand," Veltar finally admitted, his tentacles writhing with confusion. "Your species expended enormous resources for complete strangers. You lost ships, suffered casualties, spent billions of credits. What do you gain from all this?" Admiral Kim looked genuinely puzzled by the question, as if Veltar had asked him why water was wet. "We gained friends," he said simply. "The Vorthen called for help across the void, and we answered. That's enough." The concept was absolutely revolutionary to most galactic civilizations. Species didn't risk everything for strangers without expecting something in return. There were always political calculations, economic benefits, or territorial gains involved, but the humans seemed to operate on a completely different set of principles. Word of human actions spread through the underground, networks that connected oppressed populations across the galaxy. In slave pens on distant worlds, beings who had never heard of humans began to whisper stories of the species that fought for strangers. Pirates who had operated with impunity for decades suddenly found their activities becoming extremely hazardous. Captain Jung Menesio, commanding the patrol frigate Daegu, encountered this new reality firsthand during a routine patrol near the vegan trade routes. Her sensors picked up a distress signal from a merchant vessel under attack by raiders. When the Daegu dropped out of hyperspace, the pirate captain immediately tried to negotiate. "This is none of your concern, human ship," came the transmission. "We'll split the cargo with you if you just move along." Menesio's response became legendary in pirate circles throughout that sector. "You have two choices," she announced calmly. "Release your prisoners immediately and find honest work, or we show you why humans consider warfare a recreational activity." The pirates took one look at her ship's weapon signatures, remembered what had happened to the Krell, and chose very wisely. They released their prisoners, transferred the stolen cargo back to the merchant vessel, and jumped to hyperspace so fast they left scorch marks in space. Similar encounters were happening throughout human space and beyond. Slavers discovered that human merchant vessels, which looked peaceful enough, carried more weapons than most military ships. Aggressive species found that their expansion plans suddenly became much more complicated when human observers started showing up in disputed systems. Dr. Zender, who had become humanity's first official alien ambassador, spent months trying to understand human motivations. The Vorthen scientist had been given quarters aboard the new joint research station, where he worked alongside human researchers, studying stellar phenomena. "Your people continue to puzzle me," he told Commander Park Soo-ben during one of their evening conversations. "You risk everything for others, even those you've never met. Why do you do this?" Soo-ben, who had been reassigned to command the joint human Vorthen research facility, looked out through the observation deck at the stars beyond. Human and Vorthen ships patrolled together now, protecting not just this system but a growing network of species that had asked for protection. "Because someone has to," she said with a gentle smile. "Look around the galaxy, Zender. Everyone else seems to think that suffering is someone else's problem, that injustice is just part of life. But we're apparently the only ones crazy enough to think that's not good enough." The galaxy was learning a new truth. Humans didn't make friends through careful diplomacy or beneficial trade agreements. They made friends by showing up when you needed help most, by bleeding for people they'd never met, by turning not our problem into now it's personal. And once you were their friend, they'd move entire fleets to keep you safe. 6 months had passed since the battle that shattered the Krell hegemony, and the galaxy felt like a completely different place. The change hadn't happened all at once, but gradually, like dawn breaking across a dark world. Suddenly, species that had terrorized others for centuries were finding their victims fighting back, protected by the knowledge that somewhere out there, humans were watching. The new, informal law that governed galactic relations was beautifully simple. Don't make the Deathworlders angry. It wasn't written in any treaty or diplomatic agreement, but every species in known space understood it perfectly. Slavery, which had been a thriving business for millennia, became a rapidly dying profession. Slavers who had once operated with impunity now found themselves looking over their shoulders constantly, knowing that a single distress signal could bring human warships down on their heads. Many simply abandoned the trade entirely, finding honest work suddenly much more appealing than facing the wrath of a species that considered freedom a basic right. Pirates discovered that their traditional hunting grounds had become extremely hazardous. Ships that might once have been easy prey now carried the unofficial protection of humanity, and even the most desperate raiders thought twice before attacking vessels that could summon an entire human response fleet. Perhaps most remarkably, aggressive expansionist species that had spent centuries conquering their neighbors suddenly rediscovered the ancient art of diplomacy. The hegemony of Kran, which had been preparing to invade 3 neighboring systems, abruptly announced a new policy of peaceful coexistence. The warlike Confederation of Braktor began sending ambassadors instead of battle fleets to resolve territorial disputes. Admiral Kim Jae-sung stood in his new headquarters, a massive space station orbiting the beautiful world of Vorthan Prime. The joint human-Vorthan facility had grown from a simple research station into something much larger, a symbol of hope for dozens of species seeking protection from the predators that had long plagued the galaxy. Through the observation deck's massive windows, he could watch human and Vorthan ships conducting joint patrols, their formations a visible reminder that the age of unopposed aggression was over. In the distance, diplomatic vessels from 12 different species waited in neat formations, representatives of civilizations that wanted to join what the galaxy had begun calling the Human Protection Compact. The humans, typically, just called it doing what's right. Commander Lee So-young approached with the day's intelligence reports, her steps quick and efficient. She'd been promoted twice since the Kepler 442 incident, but she still preferred working directly with the Admiral rather than commanding her own ship. "Admiral, we're receiving another distress signal," she announced, her voice carrying the familiar tone that meant trouble somewhere in the galaxy. "Unknown species, Vega, sector. They're under attack by something calling itself the Zareth Collective." Kim didn't even pause to consider the political implications or the resource costs. 6 months ago, such a decision might have required committees and debates. Now, the response was automatic and immediate. "How long to assemble a response fleet?" he asked. 3 hours, sir. Captain Cho is already volunteering his entire squadron, and the Vorthan Defense Force is offering their support. Through the observation deck, Kim could see the familiar sight of ships beginning to move. The moment word spread that someone needed help, human vessels started breaking orbit and forming up in the patterns that had become synonymous with hope across the galaxy. It was like watching a machine come to life, except this machine was powered by simple human decency. "Signal all available ships," Kim ordered. "Someone's calling for help." Lieutenant Han Yujin, who was no longer the Green Academy graduate Hood, once questioned why they should risk everything for strangers, worked her communications console with the practiced efficiency of a veteran officer. The past 6 months had changed her, as they'd changed everyone who'd witnessed what humans could accomplish when they decided to care about strangers. Sir, should I inform the Galactic Confederation of our intentions? She asked, though they all knew the answer. Kim almost smiled at the question. The Galactic Confederation was still debating the legal implications of the Kepler 442 incident, forming committees to study the situation and considering the proper diplomatic protocols for such interventions. Tell them whatever you want, Lieutenant, he replied. But we're not waiting for committees to debate while people are dying somewhere in the Vega sector. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships began breaking orbit from stations across human space, their crews volunteering for a mission to help people they'd never met, members of a species they knew nothing about. Captain Song-min's gruff voice crackled over the communications network, and despite his age, he sounded eager for action. Ready when you are, Admiral, the old veteran announced. These Zareth bastards just picked the wrong species to mess with, as the rapidly assembled fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace. Dr. Zender sent out a message that would be broadcast across every communication network in the galaxy. The Vorthan scientist had become something of a celebrity since the incident, the first alien to serve as an official ambassador to humanity. His words carried the musical quality of his species, but they held a strength that came from knowing humans personally. To any who would prey upon the innocent across the galaxy, know that somewhere in the void, the humans are watching, and they consider your victims to be their friends. The galaxy was learning a profound new truth about the species from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Humans didn't make friends through careful diplomacy or beneficial trade, agreements, or political alliances. They made friends by bleeding for complete strangers, by crossing impossible distances to answer cries for help, by turning the phrase "not our problem" into "now it's personal." And once you were their friend, they would move entire fleets to keep you safe. Warprime Arthik, sitting in his comfortable prison cell where human guards treated him better than he'd ever treated his own subordinates, spent his time writing memoirs that would become required reading in military academies across the galaxy. I thought I understood warfare, he wrote in one particularly insightful passage. I was wrong. Humans don't fight wars the way other species do. They fight for people. And that makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The message was now clear across every star system, from the core worlds to the outer rim territories. Someone was always listening for calls for help. Someone would always answer, no matter how far they had to travel or how dangerous the journey might be. The humans simply called it doing the right thing. The galaxy called it the dawn of a new age.